All right, and we are live. So, welcome everybody that's watching us live on Twitch because I just started doing live streaming of the podcast for the first time a few weeks ago. So, that's been fun. But for everybody that's watching on Twitch live, welcome. And if you're listening to this later on through the different audio forms, welcome as well. But today is a very special episode. This is one that, I've had a lot of amazing people and a lot of players on this podcast over, how long have we been doing this now? A year or so. Everybody from Seth Manfield, Ben Stark, BBD, Gabriel Nassif, Raf Levy, everybody, and many more, and they've all been fantastic. The one player I've always wanted to have on, I managed to bug him enough to finally get him to come on, and Reid Duke is joining me here today. So, how you doing, Reid?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here and nice to be in that illustrious company that you just outlined.
Yeah. It's I was telling I was telling you the story before we got started, but way back when I started when I came up with the idea of writing the book for Mental Mana, the book, the mental game book for Magic, I was looking for quotes from Magic players so that I could just put it on the on the in the book, various quotes from players to have so that I could you know put examples from players such as yourself talking about how important it was. And a quote that you had put out in one of your Star City Games articles some years ago was one of the first ones that I found. And ever since then, that's when I became a fan of yours. And it just kind of followed you over the years, like many other people have. And just the way you approach the game, the like what seems like, anyways, and this is something I'd love to get into and we'll talk about, I'm sure, just when you're playing, just the calmness, the coolness, the collectedness, the emotional control, like everything. It just because being a psychology dork who does it for a living, that's the kind of stuff I always look for in people. And I was just watching over the years. I was like, man, this is like coupling that with everything that you had always said and your insights into how you approach the game. I was like, I have to talk to Reid at some point. I have to. So I reached out to Reid several times, and obviously, of course, you have so much going on with the MPL and back, when I first contacted you, that was still when GPs were a thing, and you were traveling a lot for GPs and doing all that stuff. So you're always busy, but I'm glad you managed to finally have time to come on. So, but yeah, well, listen, what I want to start with is, if you don't mind, I don't know how much you've talked about this. If you've talked about it a lot, I'm sorry, but what I would like to hear from you is just before we really get into the things I want to talk about today, just I'm curious to know personally, because I don't know that much. Honestly, I don't know that much about your background story. So, if you could kind of talk about your Magic life story, how did Reid Duke get into Magic? And in more like most importantly, I'm always curious to know from players like you, when did that shift happen where you went from just being like, you know, discovering the game, learning it, getting better at it, and then there's always that shift, that moment, that experience that happens that shifts you from being more casual to more competitive, that makes you go, okay, I can actually do this, or I want to do this, and it kind of
Yeah,
takes you to the next level. So if you don't mind painting that picture to start, that would be great.
yeah. Well, I started playing Magic when I was 5 years old. So I'll condense my 25-year life story into a digestible form. But
Sure.
I learned to play with mostly my older brother Ian. He was 10, I was 5, but also my cousins Logan and Luke. But yeah, just one day my mother brought home two starter packs. We had starter packs back in those days of Magic, fourth edition for me and Ice Age for my brother, and we just opened them up and read the little rules insert, and we did our best to play a game there on the bedroom floor. And from there we just loved it, and it was all we wanted to do. And I played more or less, to varying degrees of seriousness ever since then. Um, and
Well, what was the trajectory like? Because I mean, it's always like the gradual steps, right? So you start by discovering it. You kind of
Sure,
get
yeah.
your
So I
hands
was
on
I
it,
was very little when I learned to play, and
right?
like just understanding the rules was kind of over my head, let alone like actually building a competitive deck. But
Right.
my brother took it seriously, and soon enough he had like InQuest magazine and was like kind of starting to understand what competitive Magic was all about, and he found a local tournament and stuff like that. And then I played at like the local store level for many years, and um, like I think my brother and I maybe played one or two Grand Prix when I was in high school, and then mostly when I started getting serious was when I went to college and I started playing Magic Online. And my last year of college, I was fortunate enough to win the Mox tournament, the Magic Online Championship Series. So the way things broke was like I graduated school, and then at the end of that summer, I was going to have my first pro tour. So I sort of like put like real life on hold, and I'm like, you know what, I don't want to get a real job and not have to go to my first pro tour, so like let's take some vacation time and practice and stuff like that. And from there it was just like I got lucky at the right times and I really loved it, and was able to string together a few invitations to the pro tour. It was a rocky start at first. I had to like I didn't have success in my first six pro tours, but then at the end of sort of the second year of me playing on the pro tour, I won the finals of the Magic Online Championship
Well,
Series, and that was sort of my start.
well, so hold on. So your first six pro tours, you said you didn't do well at. Like
Yep,
what are we
absolutely
talking?
true.
What are we talking about though? Like in terms of not doing
Okay,
well?
well, I showed up to my first pro tour and I started 0-6. Um, and then I kept playing and I won the last two matches. So that was the start of my comeback. Those last two matches there. But yeah, it took me it effectively took me six or if effectively took me seven tries to make day two of a pro tour.
Wow.
That's not literally true because one pro tour each year was the 3 day world championships where like everyone could play day two. But basically, it was my seventh pro tour that I first finished in the money and had a good run.
Right. Wow. I mean, yeah, that's because again, this is something we're definitely going to talk about later on. But so I don't want to get too much into it now. But the people who see who you are now, this is something a lot of times you don't see, you don't know that backstory, and
Mhm.
it's to grind through six, suboptimal pro tours and to have the
Yeah.
will and the desire to keep going. you know how do you do that? How did you do that? Like I said, this is something we'll talk about. I would love to get into, but it just, like I said, for people watching or listening to this, it's like you would never maybe know that about you. Six pro tours, man, that's crazy. Because for some people, it happens. Like I remember, I think it's what was it? I think it was Jackson Cunningham goes to his first pro tour and makes the finals in his first one.
Yeah, yeah.
Or it didn't wasn't Wyatt Darby kind of like that? Wasn't the pro tour he
I
won
think so, yeah.
like his first
It may
one?
have been his first. I'm not sure. Well, we'd have to ask Wyatt for
Yeah,
confirmation on that. But yeah, it's a different story for a lot of people, but
yeah,
it happens a lot. Like I'll talk to somebody at a Grand Prix or a Pro Tour where they're like, oh, like it's my first Grand Prix. I made day two, but I only went 2 and 4 on day two. And I'll be like, man, like it took me 10 tries to make day two of a Grand Prix. Like you're way ahead of schedule. Don't worry. And
yeah.
often that sort of cheers people up, but it's you got to have perspective on these things.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So so this is what I'm always curious to know from players playing at your level now. What was that turning point for you? When did things turn? Was there one particular event where it just shifted, or was it just something that gradually happened over time, and all of a sudden you're looking around and going, "Well, I'm actually doing well here at the the
Hmm.
pro level." How did that transition happen? Can you recall, or do you know?
Well, there's been like a couple sort of level up
Yeah.
moments in my career, and I mean, I was always pretty good at Magic. Like like I take it seriously. I'm a pretty bright guy, I like to think. So like I could always win at the local store level, especially if I came prepared with like a good deck or whatever, or if I practiced a lot. But then when I first got on the pro tour, that was like reality check because now suddenly I'm not a bright guy who's trying pretty hard in a room full of regular people. I'm a bright guy who's trying really hard in a room of people that are way smarter than me, have way more experience, and they're just pounding me into the dust. And that's that's definitely a reality check to there's no other way to put it. But the big change I would say is um when I got on my like big testing team, which we call the Pantheon. I'm actually wearing the old T-shirt
Right.
today,
Yeah.
but Yeah, it was, I got a phone call from Patrick Chapin one day, and he's like, "Hey, we're putting together a team, and like, you're like this young up and coming player." He didn't use those words, but he's like, "We feel like you'd be a great addition. Do you want to play with us?" And I'm like,
Nah.
"Heck yeah, man!" Like, I felt like I opened Willy Wonka's golden ticket in my chocolate bar. But yeah, like
Right.
I got to play with those guys and just learned so much from every single one of them. And it was just like a real trial by fire where I had a tough year of like playing with those guys, and I was in way over my head. But eventually, you just have to learn the stuff to survive, and that's what happened.
So what was, I'm curious to know, walking into that environment, because look, there are players who are listening to this who may experience something like that in the future, who rise up and they get invited to play on a team full of prestigious, well accomplished players, and you have to walk into that kind of environment. What did you have difficulty walking into that environment with confidence? Or
Hmm.
were you able to walk into that and feel like, well, they invited me here, I belong here, like a, you know,
Well, I got one of the best pieces of advice that I've got in my Magic career, and that was from my friend Ben Lundquist, who Ben has been around for a long time, and he was several steps ahead of me in terms of my career in Magic. And he said, like, you know what, your first time you play with a group like that, just listen. Like, don't show up feeling like you're going to know all the answers or have to impress people. Just be there, take it in, ask questions, and focus on learning.
yeah.
And I think a lot of times that's you make a better impression on people if you take that approach rather than showing up and trying to muscle your way in and no, I know what sideboard card you need and I know the right play. Like,
Feeling like you have to
no,
prove yourself.
people see through that, but
Yeah.
you just take an approach of like, I can speak intelligently about this game and I'm eager to learn, and maybe one day I'll have some of the answers, but for now, there's still a lot of steps to take.
Right.
That's the approach I try to take, and still do, honestly.
Okay, cool. So when was that? When did you join the Pantheon? What year was that?
Um,
Do you remember?
2012, I believe.
Okay, because I remember when I first, because that was when I actually took a long break from Magic and I got back in 2013, and I remember watching you at the World Championships in 2013 when you were playing that Jund deck. Back when
Hmm.
Jund was good in standard, like that Jund deck was really good. And I watched you play. The first time I actually watched you play, I hate to bring this up, but Brian Kibler crushed you with red green.
No, that was fun. That was a match I was happy to be crushed in. It was one of the more memorable and fun matches that I've played.
But yeah, and then from there, I just remember watching, continuing to watch you, and I followed you ever since. But um, so talk about from that moment onwards to where you are now. What's that process been like? I mean, do you mind talking about that a bit? It just seems like it's been a steady rise since then, hasn't it? Or have there been any major down
Yeah, I mean,
periods along the
a
way? Or
steady rise, I would
yeah,
say. Well, not steady, like an unsteady rise.
sure,
Plenty of stumbling blocks and bumps in the road. But yeah, I mean, I've always just taken the approach of trying to learn and trying to improve. And especially early in my career, if I had a bad tournament or things weren't going my way, I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna get better. This is the experience I'm having now, but a year from now, I'll be even better and I'll be able to be in the same situation and then execute and get the result that I want. So I just always had that sort of desire to improve mind state.
right,
And in terms of my pro tour results, I would say things got better and better. And I linked up with an even smaller group within that pantheon, which is the Peach Garden Oath, William
yeah,
Jensen, Owen Turdenwald, and we had a lot of success in the team Grand Prix circuits, and I learned a lot from those guys too. And that was another leveling up moment in my career.
sure. And then yeah, and again, from the front, when you're just watching someone like you, all you really see is the results and what happens, so it looks like a steady rise. But yeah, I can understand what you mean. I'm sure there was a lot of ups and downs along the way, but and that brings you to where you are now, MPL. I mean, and what's that experience been like playing in Magic's, basically Magic's first truly established, professional status in esport? You know what?
Mm,
Especially because like there's a salary involved, all that
yeah.
kind of stuff. You know what has that changed? Being a real pro, I don't want to use that's the terminology to use, but has that did acquiring that MPL status did that change how you viewed Magic at all? Did that make you think it did it cause you to feel more pressure and feel like, you know, I'm part of the MPL now, there's this salary, there's all this stuff, I need to make sure I hold on to this? Or was it just more of the same, what you always did? Well, I mean, how did that
Well, I
affect
guess
you?
I'll take that question in two parts. The first
Yeah.
is the feeling of the Magic Pro League existing and being a part of it is really great because it it's validation that being a Magic player, a competitor, is actually a valid career path. And
Yeah.
I've made my living off of Magic for several years now through, piecemealing together like content creation and doing coverage and this and that, and prize money here and there, and platinum appearance fees and stuff like that. But now, like with the MPL, it's the first year that you can go like, no, look, like this person is a professional Magic player and they make a comfortable living salary doing it, and that's pretty awesome. That sort of validates a lot of what I've spent my life doing. So I think that's very cool, and I wish many people the opportunity to have that, or at least feel like they're competing for it in the years to come. Now, in terms of how do I feel being in the MPL, we've already touched on this as we've been talking, but there's like these um, how do you put it? Big fish in a small pond moments where it's like, okay, you're the best player at your kitchen table, then you go to a tournament at the local store, and you become the best player there. Then you go to a PTQ, and then you go to the Pro Tour, the MPL is uh, the biggest of the ponds. Like these folks
It's the ocean.
know what's up. So if you are not bringing your best, if you're slacking off, you're coming unprepared, like it's going to show when you play your 7 matches against the other MPL players. So it's definitely intimidating, and I feel that I have the tools that I need to compete based on my years of experience with the game. But it's like there's no room for error, right? Any day that I take off, or I slack off, or I don't practice my deck or tune my last sideboard card, like you know, Seth Manfield's doing that. Lee Shitian is doing that. So
Right.
you got to keep up with these guys, with these players.
You feel it's raised everybody's game at that level? The MPL? You feel it's made
Time will
people?
tell a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that over a long span, it will raise everybody's game, and playing against the best players just inevitably forces you to become better. It's already something we've touched on.
Yeah.
And we'll see if I think different people will approach it differently. Some people will be like, oh, I got tenure, like I can just slack off and get my
It's
paycheck,
true.
and maybe that will be the result for like one or two people, who knows. But I think for the most part, those of us that really have like passion for the game will continue trying to be the best players we can.
Yeah. Good point. Well, listen, you are actually the creator, the originator of one of my favorite MTG psychology quotes I've ever come across, or mental game quotes I've ever come across. I mentioned this before, but when I came up with the idea for writing, the mental game book for competitive Magic, I was like, I need a quote that I can put like on the back, that just from a good player that can just solidify how important it is, for players to understand just how important this is. Because if I say it, doesn't really mean that much because I never accomplished anything in Magic. It's never been my objective to do that. But to hear it from somebody like you, it gives it a bit more weight. So I was stumbling across the internet and just digging and digging and digging for something I could find. And I found an old, it must have been a Star City Games article from years and years and years ago. And you wrote about your, like, just the mental aspect of the game. And you had this brilliant quote, and this is what you said. You said, "What determines success in Magic? Is it intelligence, experience, hard work? Certainly, those are qualities that all of the most successful Magic players share. A good answer would be that it's a combination of all three. The best answer, however, is that while important, they all pale in comparison to what's really most critical. a healthy state of mind. What makes you think that? Like, where did this belief, this idea that the mental aspect of the game is that important? That yes, intelligence, experience, hard work, all these things are critical, but you have to have a healthy state of mind to really succeed consistently and do well. What is that something that you've always thought? Did that come from maybe your own experiences where you didn't have a strong mental game, which is hard to think now because we've seen you for so long, but and you had to kind of learn the hard way and that taught you how important it was? Like where did this quote come from, basically, this frame of mind that you had towards the mental game and how important it was?
Sure. Well, the way I look at it, it's like, your talent, your level of preparation, your level of practice, how well you play an individual game of Magic. These are like the cosmetic things. This is what you see on the surface. But what actually is behind all of that is um, your approach to the game, how you view yourself and cultivate yourself as a competitor, how you make sure to make it through the tough patches, which inevitably anyone who plays for a long time is going to have. And you're not going to reach the highest levels unless you are willing to be honest with yourself and work hard and be persistent. All those sort of like cliche, terms. Those are all important, and importantly, like, you're just going to quit at some point. You're not going to make it through 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, as a competitor if you don't really love it and know how to take care of yourself and have that healthy mind state.
Yeah, and I think along with that as well, I'm sure you would agree, is because it's almost like there's two different aspects to the mental game of Magic. There's the mental game that needs to be cultivated away from the table, like you said, developing your confidence, approaching the game in the right way, you know, understanding what motivates you as a player, that kind of stuff. But then there's also the mental aspect of the game that, in terms of at the table, if you draw lands 5 turns in a row, can you deal
Mm-hmm.
with that without going off the deep end? If you start off a tournament 0-1 or 0-2, how do you cope with that? If you are in a position where all you have to do is win your next 2 rounds and you make your first big top 8 and you lose one of those 2 rounds, how do you deal with that? Or let's say you go into day 2 of a GP or a Pro Tour undefeated. How do you handle that? Right? There's that aspect of the game as well, and I'm sure that's equally as important, you think, as the aspects outside of it as well.
Yeah,
Because when I think of you, I know just based on what you've said, like I can tell that the aspects away from the table you do a great job of, and we'll dig into that more of. But I think and this is what actually people, when I ask for questions on Twitter, this is what people, a lot of them ask, like, how does he stay so calm and cool and collected? He never looks angry. He never looks tilted. He never looks flustered. He's always happy. He's always personable. And you have a very good mental game at the table in terms of performing in tournaments. So how have you always been good at that? Did you learn that again through your own hard experiences and realize, okay, I need to get better at this? What's that been like for you?
it's funny. I was streaming earlier today, and I had a question in the chat where someone goes like, "Man, how do you keep your cool when someone beats you with top decks?" And I did like I don't even think I addressed the question at the time because I read it. I'm like, yeah, I don't even know like how to answer that because that's just the game for me. Like that's just part of the game, and being prepared for that to happen and trying to make decisions that lessen the chances of that happening. Like that's all rolled into one for me. And when someone top decks the card and beats me, a lot of times you just sort of like nod your head and you go like, okay, well that was the outcome this particular time. I wonder if there's anything I could have done differently to protect myself from that. But it doesn't feel like some like earth shattering thing. Sometimes it does in a particularly high pressure moment, but for the
Sure.
most part, like that's you just roll with the punches, and that's what you experience as a tournament Magic player. Um, to sort of address your question more broadly, um, it's yeah. I mean, there's 20,000 people out there that are capable of playing a game of Magic or maybe an entire day of Magic just as well as I am. The thing that's going to set apart the folks that you see consistently ranked in the top, like year over year, is their ability to, um, show up at their best at every tournament. Their ability to not let things fall apart when stroke of bad luck hits. Their ability to fight through the frustrations and make sure that they're not letting it get to them. So yeah, I think that it's learning all that stuff. I'm not going to say it came naturally to me, but at a certain point, you just realize like, hey, I'm not going to survive if I don't learn
Mm.
how to take this stuff in stride and convert that negative energy into something that can make me a stronger player or a stronger person instead of letting it destroy me and derail my tournament or derail my career.
Yeah, I think acceptance is the word. I think that's the key. I talked about this with players quite a lot, or the idea that I think most competitive Magic players know, and we'll talk about this more obviously, but I think most competitive Magic players know that variance is a thing, that top decks are a thing, that making mistakes is a thing. But I think there's very few who genuinely accept them as part of the game, accept it. Say, this is going to happen to me, whether I like it or not. And when it does, I can accept it. I don't have to be happy about it, but I'm not going to let it negatively affect me because I accept that it's part of the game and I can move forward from it. Knowing and accepting something are two different things. And I think that's a lot of times where the difference is with most people. Would you agree with that or disagree? Or what do you think? It seems like you have that acceptance of it. Like this is just I
Hmm.
accept that that's the way Magic is inherently designed, right? It's way if I'm going to play Magic voluntarily, which is what we all do, it's a choice. No one forces anyone to play. If
I
you're
think
gonna,
that's a really good way to
you
put it,
know,
Will.
you know,
And I think I can add to it, which is
sure,
that
please do.
you you don't have to like it.
Yeah,
Like
no, but yeah, of course,
by all accounts,
yeah,
you should be kicking and screaming and like it should be the worst feeling to you in the world when you get bad luck and lose a game of Magic. And the reason I say that is because being a great Magic player and being well prepared for a tournament is finding ways to make sure that stuff doesn't happen. So that's what I mean with so yeah, like you accept it, right? You know that this is going to happen. You know it's part of the game. You know going in that you're going to lose to it sometimes, and when it happens, you go like, okay, it got me that time.
yeah.
But you want to like you don't want to just be okay with it. You want to use that experience and the emotions that it brings out in you to answer the question of like, what can I do differently next time, to sort of to try to protect myself.
Great point there, and that's actually you just naturally segued into another point that I could make. You're 100% right, and this is a distinction that people oftentimes don't make or a misconception that people have. When I say you have to accept it, there's a difference between accepting something and settling for something. Okay, I'm not telling you to just settle for making a mistake or experiencing bad variance or whatever. You have to accept that it's part of the game, genuinely accept it and be at peace with that. But then when it does happen, you don't want to just settle for that. You have to go, okay, well, how could I have prevented this? How can I not make this
Yeah.
mistake again? How could I improve my variance, right? Because a lot of times you can get unlucky through your own decision making, right? You thought you got unlucky, mulliganing down to a 6 card hand that had no lands in it when realistically you could have kept your 7, but you made a
Mhm.
decision that
Right.
gave you bad var. So it's like it's weird, and these little nuances are where the real power in the psychology is found. It's a lot
Right.
of times
Yeah. Exactly.
people think it's
I think
semantics, but that's where the real power is. Is you have to accept these things that they're part of the game and you are going to experience them, and accepting them gives you power. It gives you the power to deal with them. But
I,
then,
I
don't,
think it's really natural,
yeah,
or really, um, if you're not careful, the reaction that you can have to these things, like your opponent top decking,
Yeah.
is you can a take it out on your opponent where you go like, oh, this person got so lucky,
Yeah.
and be mad at them, which is like totally not okay for several reasons. Or the second is that you position yourself as the victim. I can't believe this happened to me.
Yeah.
But neither of those are very productive ways of thinking. So again, that acceptance, it's part of the game. This is what we deal with. You roll with the punches. You move on to your next game. But also that like turning the experience into something that can help you grow.
Well said. Well said. Well, listen. Next thing I want to, because there's a lot of, for those that are listening to this, for when I knew I was going to talk to Rita, there was so many different things I wanted to talk about. I actually had to write them all down to make sure that we covered them. So we're pretty much just going to run through here. But the next thing I want to talk with you about is, so you're one of the things that I consider to be, in talking about the mental game of Magic in terms of performance at tournaments, one of the things I think is the most important and kind of more nuanced that people oftentimes don't think about is your mental approach towards competition. And what I mean by that more specifically is, do you go into a tournament with a frame of mind that's more process oriented and process focused, or do you go in more results oriented and results focused? So for example, going in and saying, okay, I have to make day 2 here. I have to get X and X record, or I have to get X amount of points, or I have to finish in somewhere in this place, or I have to win the whole tournament, or something results oriented? Or do you go in with more of a mindset of, look, I want to go and just play as well as I can. I want to make the best decisions I can each game. I want to sideboard well each game. I want to enjoy myself when I play. I want to try to be relaxed and calm and stoic and not let anything affect me, and just play to the best of my ability and be very process oriented. Just play the best Magic I can, one game at a time. And understanding which approach, you know, there's positive benefits to either of them. There's definitely negative side effects as well to, for example, being very results oriented. So what I'm curious to know from you is, what's your general mental approach towards Magic when you're going into a major tournament? Are you very results oriented where you're like, okay, I need to get this amount of points, I need to get this record, I need to finish here? Or do you just say, look, one game at a time, play my best, whatever happens, happens? How do you
It's a
approach
great question, Will.
competition?
And it's actually one that I suspect you probably have a better answer to than I do. Because the fact is, I've gone through both at different stages in my career.
Well, that's so. Which
And
one do you found was better for you? What's your experience with it?
man, it's been different. And the structure of Magic organized play, sometimes you get into these crystal clear situations where it's like, I need X result in order to achieve my goal. Where it's like, I need this many pro points to make the level that I need, or whatever. I still remember the back in the early stages of my career playing PTQs and Magic Online Championship Series tournaments. These were events where you had to get first place,
Right.
or else, it's like you play for 11 hours, you lose the finals, and it's like, here's some booster packs to take home, try again next week. And I've had that experience countless times. So there's something to be said of, you set yourself to the goal of getting first place. And when I go into the world championships each year, I'm trying to get first place. I've had the experience of getting second. I don't really care to do it again.
I
Um,
remember
so
that. I
so
remember
there's
that tournament.
there's certain times where it's like I'm really going for it. I'm gonna try to win this event, or I'm gonna try to make the top 8 and qualify for the Pro Tour, whatever your particular goal is. But then, like, tying into our earlier conversation, that there's elements that are not under your control, and you can't just will something into existence. I mean, I don't. Maybe you can. I don't really know the answer, but you have to be prepared, even if you have a goal in your mind, to take things one step at a time. And I would say, even when I'm preparing and I'm setting myself to that particular goal of, I want to get first place, once I get to the tournament on the actual day, it's very, very important that you erase that and you start taking it one step at a time.
Exactly.
Because the Another piece of advice that I've got in my career, which I think is very very true, is the moment that you're in a game of Magic and you start picturing the result, you start picturing yourself like, all right, like now I'm going to be 5-1 and like I'm in great shape. The moment you picture yourself holding the trophy, that's when you start to lose focus and everything can slip away. So I don't really know the answer to your question in terms of what's better from a tournament preparation standpoint. I think it probably depends on the 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 game, the turn, the play that's directly in front of your face.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to know what your own personal approach was, how you approach it. It's one of those things that it's not a matter of right or wrong. You can be successful using either one. You can be successful saying, you know what, I'm going to go in, I want to get first. That's what I want to do. And you could go and be successful doing that. And you can also be equally successful saying, you know what, the result is totally beyond my control. I could do everything right and still lose. I'm just going to try to play the best I can one game at a time and just see what happens. And you can win doing that too. It's just about which one works best for you, which one allows you to play your best on that day. That's the important thing. And this kind of gets to the point of it. Personally, me, I'm very much an advocate of that. I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, please. I think that in Magic, the results are very largely beyond anyone's direct control. You can do everything right and still not win. It's just the nature of the game, right? Like you can prepare adequately, you can pick the right deck, you can have the right plan, you can even execute that plan well. But if you draw 6 lands in a row in a crucial game and you lose and you're knocked out, what that had nothing to do with you, right? You couldn't affect that. Or you could do nothing wrong and you just sit across from a Reid Duke and he just has a great deck. He's equally prepared as you. He's just as skilled as you or better, and he plays well also, and he just wins. There's nothing you could have done about that. So I'm very much a proponent of that. When you go and play in these tournaments, you can influence the outcome to a degree based on how you perform, but a lot of it's going to be beyond your control. The matchups you get, the way the cards fall, and I think, in my view, I think it's better to just say, look, it's impossible for me to know what the result of this tournament's going to be. All I can ask of myself is to have a great mindset, relax, be calm, enjoy playing this game that I love to play, and just try to play the best I can every single game. And there's a really great quote I found from Patrick Chapin. He actually wrote in his book where he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something along the lines of, he actually said, when I go and play in tournaments, my objective is actually not to win the tournament. He says, my objective is to play perfectly. It's just because,
Sure.
You'd be surprised, how much success comes as a result of playing perfectly. And it's this idea of winning by not thinking about winning. It's kind of weird,
Yeah.
but
It's kind of a funny thing where you said,
yeah,
you know, I think we can agree that the goal is
of
playing
course,
perfectly or playing your best or whatever. And then the um the approach that you take to achieve that goal, I think can be different for different people.
yeah,
Like some
yeah,
people, it's enough to say, um, like I'm just going to sit down and play my best. Like my friend John Finkel is a really good example of that. Like he's just very dispassionate and he's like so
yeah,
experienced and stuff like that. That it doesn't take anything special or novel to draw out the very best player that he can be. Like he's just gonna bring it because he understands. But then I think other people sort of need those different like mental crutches where you show up and you're fired up and you go, nobody's beating me no matter what. And like of course that might be a fantasy in some degree, but if
yeah.
that's what it takes for you to bring out the best player that you can be, like,
I agree.
then go ahead and think that way.
Yeah,
Um,
I
I'm
agree.
not I'm not going to take that fantasy away from you if it's helping you be the best player you can be.
I agree with that under one stipulation, and that is as long as that approach doesn't have a negative effect on you.
Mhm.
So if you go into a tournament saying, "Yeah, my goal is to win this tournament, and that's going to be every match I play, I'm going to envision that," like you said, right? I'm going to envision myself holding that PTQ trophy and qualify for the Pro Tour for the first time. That's what I want. And but if in doing so, that causes you to feel a ton of pressure, a ton of stress, a ton of anxiety, a ton of nervousness and tension, it causes you to react poorly when you make a mistake or when you lose a game, then that approach is having a negative effect on your ability to perform. And you need to be willing to let it go
Mhm.
and be more process oriented. So I think it just depends on how the approach affects you. And that's for each
Oh,
person to kind of understand. Would you agree with
oh,
that?
I would, yeah. I'll tell you
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
worst mind state you can have from my experience is being afraid of losing. Like
Absolutely. I agree.
if you want
100%.
to go in and be
Yeah.
like, I'm going to enjoy myself, play my best, great. That's a great mind state. If you want to go in with an outrageous level of confidence and say, nobody's beating me no matter what, this is my tournament, that's great. I think that's a great mind state. If you go in and you're afraid of losing, where you're like, oh man, I went out in the semifinals, my last three PTQs. I just don't want that to happen again. Like that's not the mind state that's going to lead to you playing your best.
Very well said. It almost becomes self prophetic, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah,
You
it
go
does.
in afraid of losing and you almost create it because that fear
Mhm.
is lingering on your mind, and it's even if it's subconscious, it kind of lingers into how you play and your decisions, and it's kind of crazy how it works that way, right? That's yeah, but
Yeah,
very
it is. It is.
very well said. Very well said. So yeah, I was curious what your approach to tournaments was because from an outside perspective, it looks like you're very uh, performance oriented, but I could also see you being very results to it. But I think again, I think you actually said it perfectly. You know, it just depends. I think you could handle being results oriented, especially with your experience and how good you are at dealing with the ups and downs. I think for someone like you, it makes sense. But for players out there that are listening to this, generally those are the two ways you can really approach competition, and it's just about how that approach affects you. If being very results oriented makes you feel a ton of pressure and tension and stress and it's harder for you to relax and play well, you need to be willing to let that go and just say, look, whatever's going to happen is going to happen here. All I can ask of myself is just play my best. That's all I'm going to do. And whatever happens happens. And that way you can be relaxed and you can enjoy yourself more, and it's easier for you to play than do that instead. Whatever, whichever one gives you the best effect. But next thing I want to know, I want to talk about is your so this we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but now I really this is really good stuff here. I want to dive into a lot deeper. Is your experience and your advice on, you talked about just there, good segue, on losing. You again, I think everybody who watches you thinks this about you, and I'd be curious to know. I'm actually going to put you on the spot a little bit here, but from an outside perspective, it looks like you just have this invincibility when it comes to losing. Like you just this uncanny ability to just it doesn't look like it ever affects you. You're just able to roll with the punches and move on and keep moving forward, and you handle losing so well. Is
Well,
that the
that I think
case?
that's a
Is
little bit.
that
It's
all an
it's.
act? Is that an act because you feel like you're Reid Duke and you have to keep up this persona of, I'm sure that's not it, but I'm curious
Oh,
to
I
know,
mean,
legitimately.
there's some of that. Like, uh, look, it's not. Everyone should try to take losing in stride. There is some amount of like, hey, look, I have eyes on me. I'm like a pro player. I need to set an example. Really, it's not okay for me to throw a temper tantrum. Like that does cross my mind at times when I'm having particularly rough moments. Um, and I do have particularly rough moments. Like, make no mistake. I said it was a dubious compliment because it's like I hate losing, and it would be better for me to be, I would rather be known for like winning and stuff like that. But that it is important, I think, part of the total package to be able to handle losses, because losses are going to come, and if you let them destroy you, derail your tournament, derail your career, um, then you won't survive. So that's part of the complete package of being a pro player, is being able to handle losses. And
So
one of the things that I've worked very, very hard on over the course of my career that I was not necessarily good at the start is being able to right the ship when things are not going well. Like, I had this sort of famous um, experience the first time I played the World Championships, where my record before the final round was 1 win and 10 losses. There's no other Magic tournament, Will, where they let you keep playing at 10 losses. Like, they're getting like the super long vaudeville cane and pulling you off the stage once you get, 3, 4 losses in a PTQ Grand Prix, whatever it is. So, like, I never had the experience of like, I'm just doing so embarrassingly badly in this tournament and I have to continue playing and like keep bringing my best. And that was like pretty rough experience for me. And since then, I have really made it a goal of like, let's learn how to keep it together when I have a bad start, when things are going
Okay,
badly.
so let's go through that. Let's say what is Reid Duke's mechanism? What is your strategy? What is it exactly? Because this is what players will want to know, right? Well, yeah, it sounds what you're saying sounds great. Just don't. But how do you actually? What is it that Reid Duke does to cope with losing on the spot? You go. It's a major tournament, and you lose your first round that you play, or it's in a crucial spot of the tournament where you need to win, and if you lose you still have a shot, but you lose that round. What's your strategy? What's your mechanism? How do you deal with that? What do you do personally?
Well, one of the things that actually helped me, and this is kind of like a goofy thing that I don't know if it will help for everybody, but I actually set that as a specific goal. That I'm like, one of the things I want to do to grow as a player is I want to rebound well from losses. So when I would take a loss or when I would start a tournament 1 and 2, whatever bad experience, I'd be like, wow, I feel terrible. I'm doing really badly in this tournament. This is not the start I wanted, but this is an opportunity to work on that goal that I set of rebounding from losses. So that was actually like a way to like really make sure for me that I was that I could do it. But in general, it's just the thing that we've been revisiting over and over again, which is you don't focus on the results, especially not when you're in a match. You focus on the individual game, the individual turn, the individual play that's directly in front of your face, and you take it one step at a time. It's just like running a marathon or doing a long walk or anything like that. It's just one step at a time, and you eventually get there. If you start your marathon going like, "Wow, 26 miles is a lot," that's like a tough way to do it. If you just
Yeah.
start and you're like, "Oh, let's enjoy this," and just keep putting one foot in front of the other, maybe eventually you get done.
Yeah, they've actually found that to be true scientifically in studies. They're actually very, very interesting. They've done studies on athletes where they had one group. It was actually in swimming. So one group, they both were doing the same distance, like whatever it was, like 2 miles. But one group would not keep track of their progress. They would just swim and focus on performance, focus on execution, do this or that, and someone would tell them when to stop. And then the other group would be total like focused on, okay, I've done, this is where I am at in this part. This is where I've gone this far. I've gone this far. I'm constantly gauging how far they're going or how many laps they've done. And what they found was the group that didn't gauge their progress performed better, which
Wow,
makes
that's fascinating. I wouldn't necessarily
yeah,
have expected that.
maybe not on a surface level, but when you think about it, it actually makes more sense, right? Because
Mhm.
you're just focusing on process, performance, execution. Just do what you need to do, and all of a sudden, it just flows. Right? You hear that word a lot of times, flow. Right? You're just in this flow state, and you're just going, and you're not burdened by, okay, well, how many miles do I have? How much? How many more strokes do I have left? How many more laps do I have? And constantly, because we know this psychologically that the mind affects the body. There's a mind body connection and a physiology that goes on, and if you're constantly thinking about, oh, I've got 3/4 of a mile to go, half a mile to go, you can actually become more physically tired. We don't know how, we don't know why, we just know that that exists. So it's human beings are really strange creatures, and it's like a lot of times people will say, okay, because I think you're right for sure. A lot of times the answer I tell this to people I work with individually all the time that look, sometimes the answer is not revolutionary, it's not mind blowing, it's just simple. It's just when you lose, almost like one thing we do know works really well is rationality, like being logical about things and saying, look, like what, like literally having this conversation with yourself where you go, well, what, okay, I've just lost this match, but what good is it going to be what does that have anything to do with the next round? Just,
Mhm.
if I lost this round, does that mean I'm guaranteed to lose the next one? Is there any connection between these? And if I dwell on this loss, how is that going to serve me in any meaningful way? Well, it's
Mhm.
can I change that? No, it's over. So what's the point of thinking about it? And having that kind of inner dialogue, that rationality, kind of makes you go, yeah, that makes sense. Why? Because people will say, well, it's easier said than done. Well, right, you just move on from the loss. Don't let it affect you. And that's true. It is easier said than done, like anything, but it still needs to be done. You have to find a way to do it. That's just the way it is. That's one of the tough parts of playing competitive Magic. So, is that something you normally do? Are you good about that? Just saying, look, like, what's done is done. I can't change it anymore. It has nothing to do with what's going to happen in the next round. I just need to focus on that. Are you very, like, do you have that one game at a time, one round at a time mindset when you play? And are you good at disconnecting and compartmentalizing your tournament that way?
Speaking of compartmentalizing, one thing that I do a lot of is I find individual things within a tournament or a weekend or a preparation or anything that I can try to attach to and feel like pride in. So if we rewind to when I talked about my first pro tour, I started out
Sure.
0-5. This was the structure was that you played 5 rounds of constructed and then a booster draft. So
Okay.
even at 0-5, I was like, you know what? My first pro tour, I'm having a bad record. I'm not gonna make day two, but I'll still feel really good about myself if I do well in my first pro tour booster draft. So
Yeah.
it's like that's almost a way of like, let's wipe the slate clean. Let's separate what happened from what's about to happen and set myself to this new task.
Yes.
And you can think about that over the course of a tournament. That's I think another way of putting what I described a moment ago, where I would set the specific goal of rebounding from a loss. And if you're 1-2 in a tournament, you can go like, well, boy, at the end of the day, I'll probably feel really bad about myself if I finish 1-4. But if I rebound and I win the next couple and I finish 6-2, like that'll be great. Then I'll find some pride to take in the second half of the day, and the rounds that I did play well, or fighting through the tough experience, things like that. So just looking for individual things to focus on throughout the course of the day, and not drowning in that big picture of like, wow, I played 8 rounds, like my record's already bad. Just one thing at a time, focus on the stuff that you have control over,
Yeah.
and make it more digestible in that way.
Sure. I think you made a good point there. I think, in kind of finishing up on this specific topic, I think what's good for players is to set a standard for yourself where it's like, okay, I understand that the mental aspect of the game is important in order for me to perform well and succeed when I play. I know that. And a big part of that is being able to handle losing. So, as part of my standard that I demand from myself as a player when I go to play, I don't allow losing to have a negative effect on my mindset and my performance. And that's
Yeah,
what I that's
absolutely.
that's what I demand from myself. Now, I may not always be able to do that, you know, because we're all human, and sometimes, if say you get to the finals of a major tournament for the first time and you make a huge mistake that causes you to throw it away, and it would almost be inhuman to tell someone not to feel something about that. But it's, in general, it's okay. The reality is, it's actually not about whether or not you actually fulfill it. That's not the point. The point is, by setting that standard, you give yourself a greater chance of fulfilling that more consistently, right? Does that make
Sure.
sense? So just set that standard for yourself as a player. Say, look, I know that the mental game is important, and if I'm going to play these long, high stakes tournaments, being able to handle the losses is very important. Whether it's an individual game or an individual match or an individual round, I need to be able to handle these things. So a standard I'm going to set for myself is losing has no effect on my mindset and my performance. And you kind of just grind that into your head by saying that to yourself every day, over and over and over. This is my standard. This is what I expect from myself. And over time, it just becomes easier. It gets more natural, and your reaction to these things
That's really good.
becomes
I'm going to try that.
easier. It becomes easier. So, kind of tying into that, your experience and your advice now on different ways of losing. So let's start with, you mentioned this earlier, the dreaded top deck. we've all
Mhm.
we've all experienced it, been had it happen against us, done it to other people. You know, mulliganing to oblivion. I mean, I just think of LSV mulliganing down to whatever it was, 3 or 4 in the finals. I mean, geez, could you imagine like the
Yeah,
worst
I had that
possible
experience
time?
as well. I'm looking to
Yeah,
4 the in game 5 of the finals of the World Championship. So,
yeah, yeah. You were on Bogles, right?
yep. Hmm.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it's just, I mean, like we were talking about earlier, it's going to happen. It's part of the game. What is your experience with bad variance been like over the years, and what did those experiences teach you about coping with it, not letting it affect you, and what's your advice on how players can not let bad variance affect their mindset and how they play?
You just got to focus on the things that you do have um and if you lose a game where something bad where something happened that was unfavorable for you, like mulligans or bad top deck, missed land drop, you just need to separate the decisions that you had control over from the ones you didn't. Did I make the correct decision each step of the way? Did I mulligan because I sat there and dispassionately believed this was not the hand that gave me a better chance of winning than a mulligan? Or did I let some kind of emotional factor cloud my judgment? So, or did my opponent top decked the key card? Was that an inevitable outcome? Could I have made a decision that maybe where I won the game 1 turn sooner? Could I have kept my life total a little higher so the fireball didn't get me? Like, you focus on the things that you had control of, and it doesn't matter whether their top card is the fireball or a mountain. You focus on the things that you can control, and just realize that it's totally part of the game and the experience of being a tournament Magic player to have these unfortunate things happen.
Yeah, well said. Was there a specific experience at all that you talked about the finals of the worlds when you had to mulligan down down to nothing? Like, did you ever have a specific experience that kind of showed you like how important it is to deal with variance? Like maybe you had a period where you went off the deep end because of something, and it kind of showed you that you need to do better at handling this. Did that ever happen to you, or again just a steady something you just learn over time as it happens to you progressively? I mean, how did
I
you deal
can't.
with that? I guess that's a good question. How did you? I
I
mean,
can't.
how did you deal with that in Worlds, for example, in the finals? Well, I
Well,
mean, what
I
was going?
wasn't. I wasn't upset about game 5 of the Worlds. Like, I actually was quite proud of myself that I think in each of those individual mulligan decisions, I was happy. Excuse me. I was happy with the decision I made.
Reid muted his mic because
Excuse
he was.
me,
No,
frog in my throat there.
no, you're good.
But yeah, each individual decision I liked, and I felt proud of that, regardless of the outcome. Of course, I was not happy with the outcome of losing the
Yeah,
match,
right.
and I went home and I reflected, like, what could I have done in deck choice, practicing, sideboarding, gameplay? Like, what could I have done to have to change that outcome the next time I face a similar situation? But I wasn't. I didn't. I don't care that I mulliganed. Like, that's just something that happens in the game, and as long as I handle it the best that I can, that's fine.
Wow, very good. And I think I don't know what you think about this. I think it's kind of a really odd thing, but I've actually had players tell me that it's helped them because I do get a lot of messages. People asking me these kinds of questions a lot, and I've had players tell me that this helped them. I say try this. Try like feeling happy for your opponent that
Oh
they
yeah,
that they
absolutely.
experience some good luck. They top deck their
Hmm.
best card. They won. Like feel happy for your opponent a little bit, and along with that, like coupled with that, remind yourself like, look, sometimes that's me. I get to be that person too. I've had it done dirty to me. I've done dirty to other people. I can't complain, right? Like that that card is in their deck for that specific reason. That's why they put it there. It's the same reason if I top deck my best card, it's why I put it there. And kind
Yep.
of feel happy for your opponent and remind yourself that you get to be on that end too sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's something that I always think about in the aspect of like sport, or like if somebody comes and they go like, "Oh man, I just get so mad at my opponent, and I like, I react like a child when something bad happens."
Yeah.
That's what I tell them is like, "Hey, like you play Magic because you want to have the fun experience of like winning a game. So don't, you can't. It's not fair to
Yeah.
take that fun experience away from your opponent by being a bad sport. And like sometimes it's just not, it's their turn to win and be
Yeah.
happy, and you should just be happy when you win and be kind of neutral, or
Yeah.
be a gracious loser when you lose."
Yeah. And here's kind of going back to coping with losing a little bit. I didn't touch on this, and this is important. This is an important distinction to make. Is that, and you kind of mentioned it there, that you, it's very important that when you lose, or when you lose, especially through bad variance, you cannot allow yourself to indulge in negative emotions. And again,
Mhm.
the language is key here. You can feel a flare up of frustration or whatever, but you can't indulge in it. As soon as you start indulging in those feelings, and as soon as you start indulging in the anger and the frustration and the misery, you're going to start, that's going to start a chain effect of negative thoughts, which will chain more negative emotions, which will chain more negative thoughts. And that's how you spiral into a state of tilt, right? I mean, essentially, that's how, in simple terms, that's how, where it comes from. But so you can't indulge in these kinds of emotions. Okay. There's degrees to these things. If you lose, and I mean, again, from an outside perspective, everybody sees you as, this very calm, cool, collected when you lose, like nothing's happened. I'm sure you're disappointed when you lose. I know that for a fact. It has to be. No one is saying don't feel disappointed when you lose. Disappointment is a perfectly healthy emotion. It's fine. I would classify it as a positive emotion. Disappointment's okay. But it's when disappointment devolves through indulgence, when it devolves into anger and frustration and misery and resentment, that's when it's, you have a problem. So it's okay to feel disappointed when you lose, or when your opponent, you know, just top decks the best card and beats you or whatever. But that's as far as it should go. And then it's about using and
Right.
channeling that disappointment in a healthy way.
Exactly. Yeah, I like
You
to
know,
say,
you know,
feel whatever emotion you're going to feel,
yeah,
and then find a way to use that emotion to a
yeah.
positive end.
Understand. I understand that anger. It happens so fast that it can feel like that's the first reaction, but it's not. You have to understand how the mind, where these processes happen at such a lightning fast speed, you have no idea that this chain recurs subconsciously. That anger is a byproduct of an initial feeling of disappointment that you feel from what you're experiencing. And if you can stop it at the disappointment, then that's what you need to do. You need to just say, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm disappointed I lost, but okay, how am I going to use this disappointment? Disappointment can destroy you, or it can drive you. Perfect example is when you lose, or when you do poorly at 6 Pro Tours in a row, you're going to feel disappointment from that. But then you have a choice, right? It's like, well, what do I do with this disappointment? I can either let it destroy me, or I can let it drive me. And in your case, it was, well, this disappointment just makes me want to get better, makes me want to improve. It makes me want to get to, I've got a taste of it now, right? It's like,
Hmm.
that's what I want to get to, and you use that disappointment in a good way. And that distinction is very important. A lot of times people say, oh, well, you're not supposed to feel anything when you lose. No, no one's saying that. Just
I
there's,
actually feel
you know,
I feel in a way lucky that I had
uh,
the trajectory that I did with Magic, where
absolutely.
I had to fight every step of the way. I had to do it the hard way. Like I showed up and
Yeah,
I lost a lot before I found a way to win.
yeah.
And I think some people have the experience that they show up and they do really well and they win a lot at first, and then when later they go on a bad run, it's like,
They
what's
can't cope with
happening?
it.
Like, how do I deal with this? Like, what's going on?
Yep.
But you tend to learn more, I think, from losing, from winning, and I sort of developed that foundation early in my career
Yeah.
that I know what to do when things aren't going wrong, and then when things are going right, that's the easy part.
Oh, there's no doubt about that, and I'm glad you said that. That's 100% true. People don't oftentimes understand this enough, or acknowledge this enough, but no one wants to fail. That goes without saying. But just because you don't want to fail doesn't mean that you don't need it. Like you need to fail. Failure is a necessity in magic, in life. Failure is what builds, it's what gives you the mental strength and resilience that you need to be successful in magic and in life. You have to have mental resilience. You're going to be constantly faced with challenges and obstacles and difficulties and setbacks. If you don't experience them, you can never learn how to cope with them, and you're just going to fall by the wayside. So you need failure so that you can develop the mental strength and resilience that you need to be a healthy human being and to succeed at things. But that's the only way to learn and improve. Learning and improvement doesn't come from success. That's not where that comes from. It comes from making a huge mistake where you throw away a winning in to a top eight. That's the only
Yep.
way you can learn that mistake. You have to make it.
Hmm.
So going back to coping with losing, that's probably one of the most important things is seeing every failure as a growth opportunity.
Yep. Absolutely.
Reframing it not as some kind of experience that's attacked you in a sense, but more of, okay, this is actually a good thing. This is good for me. This is a growth opportunity. What is the growth opportunity in this experience? What about this can make me better, can improve me technically, physically, mentally? This is a good thing. I just need to use it in the right way. And if you use these experiences like that, they don't have a lasting effect on you, which is very important. So I'm glad you brought that up. It was a good point there. Um, so speaking of mistakes, um, does Reid Duke make mistakes? That's like hard for me to. I mean, I watch your stream basically every day, but player at my level, it's hard for me to know. You might see things that are mistakes that I won't notice, but what again throughout your career, what's your experience been like with making mistakes? Have you always been good at dealing? Because again, people will watch you and you do a very good job at kind of just coping with that and moving forward. Have you always been good at that, or was there a period where you were really self-critical and used to beat yourself up and it was really tough, and then you learned from it? Or I
Oh,
mean, what's
yeah. I beat myself up a lot when I make
uh,
mistakes,
yeah,
and I actually recommend that. If your goal is to be a very, very good Magic player, you should hold yourself to an extremely high standard and be very critical of your own play. But then, you just realize that, like, again, that is part of the tournament experience. You're going to show up and play a tournament. You're going to make a mistake. So be hard on yourself, but don't let it derail you. So there's, you find you find the proper time and outlet to be hard on yourself. But in the meantime, you make a mistake, you just go on to the next turn, the next play, and you make it the best that you can. I have one like kind of funny anecdote that comes to my mind,
sure, please.
which was I was playing a Reanimator deck in Legacy, and I had the card Exhume, which says each player may put a creature from their graveyard onto the battlefield.
Right.
And uh, I cast Exhume, and I thought I was going to win the game because I had a Grizzlebrand in my. Usually, Grizzlebrand to play, it's pretty academic to win from there. And then my opponent's like, that resolves, and I look, and my opponent just has a Grizzlebrand in their graveyard too. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what have I done? And
Classic,
so now
classic.
I'm just like sitting there with my head in my hands. I'm like, okay, I just played this card that's like, I thought it was gonna win me the game. Now I don't know if I'm gonna lose the game, if it's gonna have no effect, if it's gonna be neutral position. And I'm looking and I have a Grizzlebrand in my graveyard, which is like probably the most powerful creature I could put in. Or I have Iona, Shield of Emeria, which is a big angel that says you can lock your opponent out of playing a card. It's cards of a certain color.
Right.
So now I'm starting to do mental gymnastics where I'm like, okay, maybe if my opponent puts the Grizzlebrand and I put the Iona and I name the right color, like I can sort of make this a winning situation anyway. And I'm trying to convince myself. By the way, this was a feature match, so I'm on camera. I have people watching me play this through this embarrassing moment.
Even
So
better.
I'm trying to convince myself of like, how can I make this play not look as bad? So I don't have to be embarrassed to the people watching me. So I don't have to feel bad about myself. And in my thought process, I'm like, you know what? There's just no way. Like, this is just terrible. Grizzlebrand's the best creature. I can't let my opponent have Grizzlebrand. So I'm like, all right, like I'll just choose my Grizzle brand. They'll both come into play, legend rule each other. My spell had absolutely no effect, and I end my turn. But I did that, and that was my way of not compounding my mistake.
Sure.
Because if I had convinced myself to put in the Iona instead of the Grizzle brand, my opponent like very likely would have just drawn 14 cards and found a way to beat me. So at least I made this boneheaded play, but I didn't let it snowball into causing me to lose. I just sort of took my medicine. I went like, okay, I'll be embarrassed. You know, everyone can laugh at me for a minute, but then I'll go back to being the type of player that I want to be and focus myself towards the goal of winning this game.
I remember I was watching I think it was a Jun video, one of your million
Mhm.
Jun videos, which I love. That's like it's I think I've seen this before, like on YouTube comment sections. It's like when I see a Reid Duke Jun video, I just click play. That's it. And it's pretty much like that with me. Whenever I see it pop up on my feed, I'm like, put aside everything, watch replay Jun for 2 hours. But I remember I was watching you play a match one time, and I forget the exact circumstances, but I think it was you thought your opponent had like a Chandra in hand for like 8 turns in a row, and you were making decisions like based on that. and
Sure.
then and then you realize you're like, wait a second, because you could like see their hand and it was revealed through Thoughtseize or something, and you were like, wait a second, what happened to the Chandra? And you're like, wait, did they not have it this whole time? And you're like, okay. And you literally, I thought it was brilliant. You like talked people through it. Like, okay, let's slow down here, and let's make sure we don't compound the mistake. And I love
Mhm.
the language that you used. It was very good. Let's slow down here and make sure we don't compound the mistake. And then you proceeded to play. And I thought that was really good, in terms of coping with mistakes in the moment when they happen. I think as a player, if you're listening to this, inner dialogue is just so important. You have to be aware of that voice inside your head, and you have to have the right kind of self-talk going on. You can't you in I'm actually gonna not push back against you on this because I think that you mean the right thing. I want to play devil's advocate a little bit with you here, and then I want you to tell me your
Please
thoughts
do.
on this. Um, self and scientific studies have shown this overwhelmingly to be true. I'm not going to go through them here because there's a lot of them and it's not enough time, but we know psychologically beyond any shadow of a doubt that self-criticism is really terrible for people. It has a lot of really bad short-term and long-term, psychopathological effects and physical effects as well. Like self-criticism is really dangerous, and it's something people want to avoid as much as possible. But I think what you're really referring to, and again, tell me what you think here, there's a difference between criticizing yourself and criticizing your performance or your play. That's different. And
Yeah, yeah.
that's okay. And people will say, well, what's the difference? I'll give you an example of what I mean. So let's say you do that. You play an Exhume and you realize your opponent has a boneyard, a Gristle brand in the graveyard, and you say, I can't believe I just did that. I'm such an idiot. I'm so stupid. I can't, and I'm on a feature match too. I should just quit playing. This is so ridiculous. I'm definitely going to lose now. That's self criticism. You're insulting yourself. You're berating yourself. You're degrading yourself, right? Like that's self criticism. Performing or criticizing your decision, saying, well, that wasn't the smartest decision. Okay. What do we need to do here next so we don't compound the mistake? Right?
Right. So the distinction that helps me is I'm very, very harsh on myself as a Magic player. I
Yeah.
expect the best,
Yeah.
and I am very disappointed in myself when I don't make the right play. But my value as a person is not connected to how well I play a game of Magic. So, uh, it's so the better way to like I'm not making myself depressed. I'm not getting down in the dumps when I don't do it the way I want to.
Yeah.
It's just again, we keep going back to it, finding the way to channel your emotion into a positive outcome. So it's just going like, boy, how do I make sure I don't make this mistake again? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I
I'm
think
like,
that's
I'm not okay with making these mistakes. So how do I make sure they don't happen? Not,
right.
I'm not okay with making these mistakes. So let me go like quit Magic and sit in front of the TV with a tub of ice cream. Like, no, like that's not, that's
Yeah.
not what we're going for here. It's and try to avoid words like idiot or
Yes.
like noob or
Okay.
like it's your value as a person is not related to how well you play a game of Magic. Your value is you just want to be the best Magic player you can be. Is I guess
No,
the way to put it.
and that's fine. That's fine. It just that distinction is important to make though, because it's you should never as a player attack yourself, degrade yourself,
Sure.
insult yourself, beat yourself up. In that sense, you shouldn't do it. It's not good for you. And even if you don't feel the effects of it now, it will lead to extreme, debilitating, constant self criticism inside Magic, outside Magic later on. We know that for sure. So it's fine to criticize the performance, to criticize the decision, or even if you do it, there's even degrees to it where you can joke about it. Like if you sit there and you smile and you laugh, like this is actually something I would do, where it's kind of like, what is it, self-depreciating humor, where you're like, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that. If you can
Mhm.
do it in that way, it's fine. But just like I said, that distinction is important. That's another issue I deal with a lot with athletes, with players. That self criticism can be, again, even if it's not something you notice now in the short term, it will get worse. It's like anger. You can indulge in anger in the short term and win, but all you're doing is making that anger into a habit, and it will amplify over time the more you indulge in it as well. So it's just don't criticize yourself. I would say personally, criticize the decision, criticize the performance. Yeah, that was a stupid decision. I shouldn't have done that. That was ridiculous. Do this next time instead. Come on, you can do better. Being positive towards yourself in that way is good.
Yep.
So excellent. Well, yeah. So that was a good little, basically halfway through here. That was a good thing talking about losing, different ways that you can lose and how to deal with all that stuff. Now it kind of segues into this. Probably again, the thing I would say you're probably most quote unquote famous for is emotional control. Stuff like tilt. Does Reid Duke tilt? Do you tilt? I don't think I've ever seen you like tilt off in terms of showing like I'm talking about like real obvious being affected by something, a loss, a top deck, a mistake. I don't think I've ever seen you sustainably affected in a negative way or put yourself into a tilted state like that before. Is that accurate?
Well,
Is that accurate? Number one,
no,
and
no,
number
no.
two,
I
no.
definitely. We all have our moments, and
Uh,
I've been on serious tilt before. Things have really upset me. Um, I try not to show it in a game. Like
yeah,
it's just not okay to show it in a game for the very simple reason that it reduces your chances of winning. So
sure.
just don't go on tilt during a game if you want to be an elite competitor. And then I have worked hard to try to look for ways that I can decompress between rounds in a tournament. So I do a lot of just like going outside for a walk,
That's
just
brilliant.
like get some air, anything to get your mind to sort of reset.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think that sort of thing is going to be different for every person. But just looking for ways that you can be, like hit the reset button and find ways to get over it quickly and efficiently.
You see, you said earlier that when you had to mulligan to what was it, three in the World Championships,
Or
four? Yeah,
yeah,
that didn't. You said that didn't have any effect on you. You were okay. You weren't unhappy in that situation, or you weren't angry in that situation. That's I I think most people in that situation would have been pretty upset about that. What, like in that specific example, how were you able to keep yourself together when you're in the finals of the World Championships, especially, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but especially, because you had a 2-0 lead in that finals, didn't you?
sure.
Right?
Yeah, I mean,
So
you still see.
you know by that point that you were up 2-0. Things have just slowly fallen apart one game at a time, and now
Mhm.
you had it. Now it's now you're mulliganing to three. Like, what was going through your head in that situation? How did you not tilt off in a situation like that? I mean, how did you? I'm really curious to
Well,
know.
I don't know exactly what was in my head at the
Yeah,
time, but it's like, okay, I see the writing on the wall. I'm very likely I'll be really upset if I lose because this is a unfortunate turn of events.
right.
But there will be a time for me to feel crappy. Right now, I'm playing, so
Yeah,
let's play. Like there again. As a competitor, you just have to find the way to give yourself the best chance of winning, and wallowing in self pity is not the way to do that. So
yeah.
there's that. It's fine to feel self pity, as you said earlier, like feel whatever emotion you're going to feel, but just there's a time and a place for it, and now's not the time.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about things like tilt, I think, and I would love to get your thoughts on this. I think self-talk is really the key. It goes back to inner dialogue again. It's. I know I mentioned this earlier, but emotion, and this isn't true 100% of the time across the board in every situation, but generally speaking, we know that emotion is a byproduct of thought. What you think has an effect on how you feel, produces, your emotions. And again, this process happens so lightning fast that it feels like the emotion is the first reaction, right? You're in an empty board state. You're both empty handed. It's your turn. You draw a card. It's a land. You play the land. Your opponent, we've all experienced this, right? Your opponent draws a card and it's 5 mana big Teferi and they put it down and you're like, you know, and that anger comes up, right? And then it spirals and you end up being in a tilted state. That is just a byproduct. What happened was, and I'll walk through this process very quickly here, but what happened, that tilted state is a byproduct of a chain of events that led up to it, right? And it all starts with, whether you realize it or not, when your opponent laid down that Teferi, instantaneously your mind applied an interpretation to what you just experienced, right? So your brain has to process what you've just seen, right? And that's what thought is. You're creating thoughts about what you're seeing, and it happens purely subconsciously. We know, for example, on average, human being has anywhere from 50 to 70,000 thoughts per day, 35 to 50 thoughts per minute. Most of it, 95% of it, is purely subconscious. You have no idea that it's happening, but it's there, right? And when your opponent lays down that card, you are thinking about what you're experiencing and you're applying thoughts and interpretations to that experience. And it's that thought that then creates the emotional reaction that you feel. And then what happens is you end up in this feeding cycle where, even if it's subconsciously, your opponent lays down that Teferi, you think to yourself, oh, crap, this is over.
Hmm.
That's it. Like, oh, they're so lucky. This is ridiculous. There's no way I can win. Like, these thoughts happen on a very subconscious level. And that's what gives rise to these feelings of, the only reason you can feel anger towards something is because it makes sense, right? You feel angry about something because you're thinking something about it. Like, there's players who will experience that exact same situation and not react with anger. Why? Same situation, different reaction. Subconsciously, for whatever reason, the thought process, the interpretation is different. So when you feel that sensation of anger, it's because subconsciously you've applied some kind of negative thought to what has just happened. And that's what creates the negative emotion. And then that negative emotion creates more negative thoughts, which then feeds into more negative
Yeah,
emotions. And they
I
feed
guess
off, and
when
that's
you
what,
frame it this way, Will,
yeah,
about
yeah,
thoughts rather than emotions,
yeah,
when you're in a game of Magic, it's just the thought of does this make me feel? That's just a bad thought. That's just
yeah,
irrelevant. Nobody
yeah.
cares. The thoughts
Good point.
that you should care about are, what do I have control over? What
Yeah,
decisions can I make to help to improve my chances of winning?
yeah.
And yeah, so just emotions not part of that.
Great point. Or going back to what you said, using you as an example, and I told you that Jun match, we're like, okay, let's make sure we slow down here and not compound the mistake. That was
Mhm.
your dialogue about what you were experiencing. It just happened to be more conscious in that situation. And that changed your emotional reaction to that situation. It's, and this is something that, as a player, if you're listening to this, it's something you need to practice. You need to practice, like, when you're playing games, And the good thing now is we all have Arena and online. It's easy to practice this every day. When something happens to you, negative, that we would call negative, right? You have to start practicing taking control of your inner dialogue in those situations and talking to yourself in the right way. So
Yep, that's a great
when
point.
you make a crucial mistake, practice talking to yourself in a confident, empowering manner. Saying, okay, I've made a mistake here, but the game's not over till it's over. Doesn't mean I've automatically lost. Just focus on what I need to do next. What's the next thing I need to do here? Don't compound the mistake. Like that's always going to be my phrase from now on from Reid. Don't compound the mistake, and that will change your emotional reaction to the situation. If you just let your mind react to things subconsciously, it's almost always going to sabotage you. It's a very dangerous game to play. So try to be aware of what's happening to you and how you talk yourself through those experiences, because that will change the emotional reaction that you have. And you can actually, I always tell people, think of tilt as like physical health, right? What's the best way to be in physical health? It's to prevent problems. It's not to treat yourself like crap and then you have to go to the hospital because you're half dead. That's not the right time to do. It's to try and prevent these things from happening, right? So tilt is the same thing. The best way to deal with tilt, because I get that question a lot, it's not to deal with it after it happens. The best way to deal with it is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Don't let yourself get to that point. And I think the best way to do that is to control your inner dialogue. Talk yourself, be aware of what you're saying to yourself and how you're interpreting these experiences, because that will determine your emotional reaction. And I mean, just think about that. If you tell yourself, look, game's not over till it's over, right? I'm gonna exude the Gristle brand, but I'm gonna do the legend rule, basically reset the board and start over again, clean slate.
Yep.
This game's not over yet. That's gonna breed feelings of hope, optimism, confidence, even if in a small way. It's gonna keep you from getting into the dumps. So yeah, very complex. We could talk about that for a long time, but that's generally what I would tell people in terms of emotional control. Inner dialogue is the most important thing. And are you pretty good about that? Do you think, having good inner dialogue when you play? It seems like it from an outside perspective. I think it's very hard to be in control of
Yeah, well,
one's
that's a nice compliment.
emotions.
And, I don't have your same training, so I don't know that I've consciously thought about it in that way.
Yeah.
But it makes total sense, and I think a lot of the things that I do to control myself sort of do fit into that framework.
I think so too. And I think does maybe playing online a lot helps you with that, because you have to constantly articulate what's going through your mind, right? And you
Yeah, I
kind
think
of
it can help or it can
yeah,
hurt because
true.
what you said, like I really liked how you said, don't indulge in the negative feelings. And it's so
Yeah.
easy when you're alone in your room, you don't have an opponent across the table to just be like no, no, Teferi again, screaming, slamming the table. But then that trains you to react like that every
It
time, and
does. It
that's pretty
does.
bad. So
Yeah.
I've seen it. Playing online has the potential to train you into either very good or very bad habits, depending on how you do it. So, just really, if you're playing high volume online, taking care to make sure you're focusing on quality over quantity in terms of your practice, and you know, it's so easy to just be like unlucky again. Let me fire a new game, but then you're learning, and
Yeah.
you need to really just focus on understanding what's going on when you play,
Yeah.
and not just taking the easy way out of firing up another game.
Real quick here. I'll walk you. Do you mind if I walk you through the brain science behind this, how it works?
Sure, sure.
So this is actually really interesting, and this gives people a neural understanding of why this is so important. So you're right. Mental habits are a thing, right? You can get into the mental habit of getting angry like that as soon as something bad happens, a top deck, a mistake, whatever. But why? Why? And that's, nobody does that consciously. Nobody goes, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get really pissed off now. Ready, go. Like nobody. It purely just happens out of habit. Um. Okay. Why is that? Because here's the thing, right? All of us, our brains, we all have billions, trillions of these things called neural pathways, right? And what happens is whenever you think a thought or you experience an emotion, a pathway gets created in your brain. think of it as like a highway of information, right? Because that's what the brain is constantly doing. It's just an emotion is just a form of information to the brain, and it will transmit that information from one part of the brain to the other and out to the body. So, what happens is when you feel something like anger, for example, right, a neural pathway gets created, right? So, and there's actually a term for this called neurons that fire together, wire together.
Okay.
And so it starts with you get angry, that creates the pathway. And then what happens is the more you indulge in that anger, what do you think happens to that neural pathway?
They probably become stronger.
It gets thicker and thicker and stronger and stronger and stronger. And the brain is just an efficiency mechanism. It is just trying to find the fastest, most efficient way to process information that it can. And the more you indulge in something like anger, the more you thicken and strengthen that neural pathway. You're essentially hardwiring anger into your brain when you do that.
Yeah, of course, I don't have any formal training in this, but I do remember encountering something a number of years ago along these lines, which is that in the old days, and you can add to this or correct me, but in the old days, they used to believe in something called catharsis, whereas you experience a negative emotion and you get it out of your system. So
Yeah.
you go outside, you yell and you scream, or you punching bag, you get the negative emotions out of your system. But then in more recent times, they actually
Yeah.
realize that it's what you're describing. You're just training yourself
Yeah.
into having to have that reaction every time something bad
Yeah.
happens.
Neuroscience was the key. Neuroscience
Mhm.
is what is showing all of this. We can actually see the physical aspects of psychology now that we couldn't see 20, 30 years ago. So that's a big thing. But okay, well, listen, we're going to start closing things out here. Last couple things I want to run through with you here real briefly. Um, I had Ben Stark on a while ago, and we talked about motivation and magic, what motivates him to play, and we talked about the importance of well, again, it kind of goes back to being results oriented versus process oriented. What motivates you? I'm curious to know what motivates you as a player. Are you somebody who's motivated more by things like trophies and prizes and results and rankings and stuff like that, external success, or are you somebody who's more motivated by process oriented things, growth, learning, improvement, mastery, enjoyment, fulfillment? What some blend of the two. What
Mm.
motivates you as a player, and what's you know how do you approach the
Um,
game in that way? Would you say? I have my opinion based on what I think, based on what you've said over the
well,
years, but
magic has been such a big part of my life for so many years, and I use magic as sort of like a an example or a mirror for like trying to be the best person I can be. So I want to be the best magic player that I can be, and I want to use those same techniques and trainings to be the best person that I can be. So I would say it's a lot more about the journey of like personal growth than about the actual physical outcome. And I would way rather show up at a tournament and play very, very well and end the day proud of the way I'd conducted myself. I'd rather have that and have a bad record than show up and walk home with the trophy, but be like, dude, I played so bad, or like,
it's
you
interesting.
know, I cheated. Like,
Yeah,
I don't want these things. Like if I cared about, there's lots of things that I could do to get the result, but like I want to play with a high level of sportsmanship and honesty and expecting the best of myself. And that's what's important to me. And hopefully the results follow, but like the process is more important than the results.
very cool. That's what I thought. Because again, seeing the things you've said over the years, I know you actually tweeted this recently, not too long ago. You were talking about how you said, your hope is that players will strive, to be rewarded more through self improvement and enjoyment of the game, more than
Right.
anything else. I remember you tweeting about that recently. So yeah, that's good. All
Yeah,
right. Well,
like
listen.
if you want people to pay attention to you and say nice things about you, there's a lot more easy ways to do that than sitting at home and practicing math. Like
Yeah.
it's like you really have to enjoy the self improvement aspect of magic, I think, and have that be a goal in itself. if you want to make it in the specific career of being a Magic competitor. Lots of things you can do in the Magic world, but if you
Right.
specifically want to compete.
Yeah. No, I think it kind of ties into what we talked about before. Same thing, how you mentally approach tournaments. You can apply the same thing to how you mentally approach the game. You should want to win and be successful, but I think it's better to just let those things happen rather than trying to chase after them constantly. Just let them happen and focus on let those things happen as a natural side effect of focusing on growth, improvement,
Yep.
mastery, enjoyment, the social aspect of the game, making friends. That's I think very important, very true. Okay, let's finish up here. I asked people on Twitter to submit questions that they wanted to ask you, and so we'll just go through various questions here. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. We'll start with the top here. First question is from Jeremy or Zova. Jeremy listens a lot. He's a regular listener. So Jeremy asks, how many copies of Peach Garden Oath have you signed in your lifetime? And is there a favorite memory of a level up moment in your gameplay?
Man, these how many have you signed questions
yeah.
really hard to estimate because it's like
Yeah.
over some span of time. The Peach Garden specifically, I would say more than 20, less than 50, because
Really?
it's a pretty obscure card.
True.
Um, maybe it's more than, I mean, we'll say less than 100, probably in the 30 to 100 range. Really hard to estimate more accurate.
Right.
Um, enough that I'm not surprised when someone asks me. And then the second part of the question was a level up moment. I would say, yeah, joining the Pantheon,
Pantheon, right?
my
Yeah.
team in 2012.
That's cool. Okay, another one here. Because you're on the ballot for the Hall of Fame. Sorry if you've been trying to avoid that topic recently, which I wouldn't blame you. But Chris Lee, another regular listener here, was asking, what would a Hall of Fame induction mean to you, and what will happen if you miss out? Is it something that's really important to you? Is it something that's always been on your mind? Have you always thought, I got to make the Hall of Fame, or is it just like, it's cool and I'll be proud, but what's your take on that? I guess you don't have to answer it if
Well,
you don't want to,
one thing
but
that's cool is that the Hall of Fame voting ties into, like, I have never won a Pro Tour or World Championship, and um, those are the things that you get recognized for
right,
from an external, like, community standpoint, is usually spiking a tournament, getting a trophy, Player of the Year, Pro Tour champion, whatever. Um, but the Hall of Fame voting is sort of a time where people can appreciate, like, hey, this person has, like, played their whole career with X standard of excellence and honesty, and you celebrate the things, the accumulation of small stuff. So that's something that I've really enjoyed and found rewarding about the whole existence of the Hall of Fame, is like being able to celebrate someone's career as a big picture thing instead of just their best or worst moments.
cool. All right, Paula Wallerman asks, I'd like to know how he maintains his positivity and his friendly vibes, especially when losing and making mistakes. Is there any effort or strategy to it, or is it just the way he is?
Well, I would say what we said earlier, which is
Yeah,
that I play Magic to have fun and hopefully win as often as I can. And when I'm playing against you, that's why you came too, because you want to have fun and win as often as you can. And win, you beat me, you get the top deck, you outplay me, whatever it is. Like, I don't want to take that away from you. I want to just allow you to enjoy it. And if I'm gonna be upset over losing, I'll go do it somewhere else. So I'll shake your hand and say congratulations and good luck, and I'll be friendly to you. And then if I want to go, feel sorry for myself, I'll go do it somewhere where I'm not bothering anybody.
fair play. All right, Francesco Pazzi. I'd like to ask Reid, how does he keep his attention high during long tournaments, and how does he handle the pressure when he is one loss away from being eliminated from a top eight?
Taking
Interesting.
it one step at a time, finding ways to clear your mind between rounds and reset each and every time. That's something that I think individuals will have to find out what works best for them, um, in terms of keeping energy levels up over the course of. varying
Yeah.
levels of like sleeping the night before, eating right, taking breaks between rounds, all these different things just to find what works best for you.
Okay. Reid's got to get going here. I'm going to try to fly through all these questions here. So we're going to kind of bullet through these. All right. Daniel Goetschel, how do you stay focused slash navigate when you are overloaded in a game with decisions or information? So I think of like, BBD in the
Mm.
world championships, a million
Mhm.
creatures in the band come, like, how do you not get overloaded in situations like that?
Well, Magic's a really, really complicated game, and there are definitely moments where you're like, you know what, I'm perfectly. I'm not going to get everything, but you try to don't drown in it. Don't be overwhelmed. Try your best to identify the things that are most important, and like potentially using shortcuts uh, to to parse information. And I'm trying to think of an example, like an example game state, but like every game state is going to be complicated in a different way. So if you're thinking about a complex combat step, you might be like, okay, well, let's count the number of creatures. So like I know that X number of creatures are going to be unblocked. So let me like work backward from that position.
Interesting.
And you might not know all the best ways to line up the attacks and blocks, but if you focus on those key things of like three creatures getting through, how much damage is that? What are the attack back? Like focus on the questions that you think are most important. Um, Take it slow, stay composed, use the amount of time that the rules allow you to use, and just don't be overwhelmed. Don't drown in it. Don't give up. Do the
Gotcha.
best you can.
Okay, last we got three more here. Astro Blaster. I'd like to know if he, Reid, has ever gotten nervous or anxious before playing and how to overcome that. Anxiety has kept me from playing a lot. So, do you get super nervous before you play, and if so, how do you deal with that?
I get nervous every single time I play a tournament match of Magic, and it has not gotten lessened as I've gotten more experience. I just learned to deal with it better. It's just like I still get the same amount nervous, but it's just become a more normal experience to me to play while nervous. So
You just get used to the feeling
yeah,
of
I
playing in
mean,
that
for
state.
someone who struggles, someone who struggles with anxiety, like I don't know that I have the answer for that. I don't know if I've had the exact same experience that you've had, but I mean, you just sort of look for ways that you can be comfortable in the situation. And I mean, once you've been there a few times, it starts to become more naturally. So don't give up and just try your hardest.
Gotcha. Okay, Christian Choi. How does he keep such a low profile away from the game?
Uh, I don't know. I mean, that might be something that's changing now with my regular stream.
Yeah.
I figure, there's lots of awesome people that you can find on the internet and follow and learn about and stuff. People come to me because of my experience in Magic, so I try to at least use that as a centerpiece for everything. Is my experience with Magic.
Okay, last two here, and I'll let you go. What was your best Magic moment and why?
I would say one of my most memorable Magic moments was the first time I made a Pro Tour top eight, and I'd just been at it for so long, so many years, so many sort of heartbreak moments, and
Sure.
like when it finally happened, it's like wow, like it almost doesn't seem real. And I had all my friends and family and teammates there, and just giving everybody a big hug, and it's like felt like it was finally my turn.
Cool. And that was from Theophile, just so everybody knows. And last question here. I saved the most important question for last. Um, Everyone, we have to know the answer to this. It's very important. Chris Barrett, what kind of shampoo and conditioner does Reid Duke use? We have to
It's
know.
no shampoo or conditioner, just mermaid tears. Just rinse once in the morning with mermaid tears, and you're all set after that.
The tears of Tron players. But okay, well, listen, we'll go ahead and wrap up there because I know you gotta get going. Listen, again, it's been a pleasure. I've been wanting to talk to you for so long. I appreciate you giving me and everyone else your time to come in and give us your experiences, your advice, your insights to these things, and it was a real pleasure. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
it,
you,
man.
Will. I really enjoyed talking with you. awesome that you sort of take head on these really important topics that not a lot of other people in the magic community take, and I was really happy to be a part of it. Thanks.
Cool. Well, listen, if people want to follow you, I mean, I know you do Twitter a little bit. What's your? How can people reach you on Twitter? Most importantly, talk about your stream. You stream every day. Talk about that. How can people watch you and connect with you more?
Yeah, thanks, man. So I'm just at Reid Duke on Twitter. Pretty simple, just like my name. And then twitch.tv/Reader Rabbit is my Twitch stream. That's because Reader Rabbit is my handle on Magic Online.
Right.
And I'm there during the day, Tuesday through Thursday, and then often I mix in like Friday also. But you can find me during the week.
And lastly, here you also do Spikes Academy course, correct? Talked about that because I think that's a great thing. I think it took way too long for someone to finally do something like that. That's a really great. So talk about the course that you do with Spikes Academy.
Yeah, Spikes Academy is cool. I have a modern course, which at this point it's I guess over a year old, but the whole goal of the course was to stand the test of time. And it's not about an individual deck or an individual snapshot of the metagame, but more like how do I understand what's going on in the modern format? How do I adapt quickly when there's, say, a change to the banned list, like there recently was? And just sort of like once you understand the things that are driving the format, it puts you in a better position to know how to approach an upcoming modern event in any snapshot in time. So yeah, that's my Spikes course. Of course there's a lot of other professors coming up with new content all the time, but yeah, if you're looking for something, you can check out Spikes Academy.
Okay, cool. Well, listen, thanks again. And for everybody here on Twitch watching and listening, I appreciate you coming out and spending time with us. If you're listening to this on Google Podcasts or Spotify or SoundCloud or iTunes, wherever you are, I appreciate you tuning in as well. And I will see you in the next episode soon. All right, take care.